CRWS, Countering Racism White Supremacy Book Club. Like, share, subscribe, and comment below.
Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
Hello, and welcome to CRWS Book Club. We are doing a study of Bring the War Home by Kathleen Belew. Today we will be discussing Chapter 4, Mercenaries and Paramilitary Praxis. This chapter goes through between the time of the 70s through the 80s and the different ways in which people who were in white supremacist groups worked in mercenaries, as well as worked in different degrees of paramilitary activity, specifically in what is called Latin America, so Nicaragua and El Salvador, around the time of the Iran-Contra scandal. And it also goes into discussions about how that type of paramilitary behavior was significantly influenced by a lot of their time in Vietnam as soldiers. So I guess we can first start off with anyone's thoughts on the chapter. I think the chapter starts off talking about someone named Tom Posey, who was also enlisted in the Marines. I believe the first thing that came, oh wait, no, this is Decatur, Alabama. The first thing that came up to me that I thought was really interesting, and I feel like this may be the author practicing some sort of, practicing racism, because on page 81, she says, for instance, U.S. foreign policy did not support the white supremacist wars in Rhodesia and South Africa, at least in part because of President Jimmy Carter's commitment to human rights and his dedication to race-neutral democracy as a moral issue at home. I thought the last part, his dedication to race-neutral democracy as a moral issue at home, I did not understand what that meant. So if anyone else understands what that means, I would love to hear their thoughts. But I also thought it was just interesting to imply that, you know, they were against South Africa because of a commitment to human rights, when most likely it was because a lot of non-white people around the world, and I think white people too, oppose South Africa, because I don't think that the U.S. foreign policy was always so antagonistic to the apartheid regime there. So I thought that part was interesting, and I'll open the floor to anyone else's initial thoughts.
Yes, this section, chapter 4, mercenaries and paramilitary praxis, was another, for me, fascinating study into the system, what it is and how it works, and like just the people, the white people who choose to practice racism in the manner that they do. Like, for example, we're introduced to Tom Posey. And I'm going to read here a little bit about Mr. Tom Posey, who was a white person who decided to practice racism, white supremacy in a very direct and I would say also intense manner. But he says here, Tom Posey was so eager to fight communists that he attempted to join the Marines early. At 16, when he came of age in 1964, he did enlist in the Marines and served in Vietnam, rising to the rank of corporal by 1966. He also joined the Alabama National Guard and explored right-wing groups, having become a member of the anti-communist and ultra-conservative John Birch Society in 1963. After coming home from Vietnam, Posey found that life as a wholesome grocer bored him. Peacetime is miserable, sitting on my butt. So what correct thinking person would call like peacetime miserable? It seems like this person needs like conflict, to not feel discomfort, and which is super I would say tragic and also very terroristic, because we're going to learn a lot more about Tom Posey. But this is something we're seeing again in 2022. We still are seeing these behavior patterns. Kyle Rittenhouse, very young, suspected racist, wanting to arm himself. He's not able to have a gun, but he's doing it. Tom Posey tries to join the military very early, wanting to just perhaps they're attempting to show their dedication to the system or practice racism in their manner sooner. But very, very telling. Let me see if I have any more notes about this particular.
Can I add on, or actually keep on?
Yeah. And I wanted to say that he was very eager to mistreat, like him wanting to join the military. I see that also as them being very eager to mistreat people, a very serious, dedicated, suspected racist. And also, we have to decode this term here, anti-communist. I have to decode this term to mean either a non-white person or a white person who has decided to practice racism in a manner that these white supremacists that we're learning about disagree with, because we're going to hear communist and anti-communist come up a lot, and that could be a really confusing term. Also, ultra conservative, that also could have to decode that as just direct, white supremacy. I would call that. I don't know what ultra conservative could possibly mean. Oh, go ahead, Miss Ash.
Oh no, I thought that was a good point about the anti-communist, and it reminded the whole chapter when they were discussing different people in these mercenaries saying, oh, since I was a kid, I wanted to join the army and fight communism. And it just reminded me growing up, oh, I want to fight radical Islam. I'm like, they just mean the same thing to me, which is just not white. And it's just a way of saying it without saying it. Because all I heard when I was a kid was radical Islam, radical Islam, radical Islam, which I'm assuming is the same thing during this time in the 80s of this talk about anti-communism.
Yeah, this text is an excellent display on just what we learned from race code, or how white people will use coded language, double speak, some call it, to just get their messages across, I would say. So for example, we can see it right here, because the author, Miss Kathleen Belew, she says, instead of delving into the domestic white power movement, however, Posey took a different route. He formed a new group that used similar guiding principles for violent action. Civilian Military Assistance, CMA, drawn largely from military veterans and active duty National Guardsmen in the South. CMA described itself as a civil organization dedicated to supporting anti-communist combat in Central America with supplies, weapons, and manpower. So the author is saying that instead of diving into domestic white power movement, he took a different route. This is still demonstrating white power, if you ask me. It's still demonstrating white power, the ability to practice racism. Also doing it in just such an awesome way. You're forming like military groups that are eventually going to attempt to like invade other large areas of non-white people. So it's pretty I don't know, this is what racists do, if you ask me. This is pretty white power to the max, but she's not calling it that. She's calling this a different route for some reason. Something I'm paying attention to.
Throughout, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, throughout reading this particular section, it seems to me that what the US government, the white supremacists were doing with the so-called CMA, these civilians, these white supremacists, whatever you would like to call them, was that they noticed that they had a somewhat of an issue on their hands, right? The white people who came back from the Vietnam War were dissatisfied, displeased with the conditions, and they were ready to take it out on anybody and everybody that they saw. Most of the victims being non-white, but they didn't mind getting a few white people involved too. So it seems that at that time the white supremacists had an issue on their hands. So the solution to that was starting a war in Nicaragua, in Central South America, and sending those white supremacists there to join the conflict, to quench their so-called thirst for violence, and to go out there and practice racism, mistreat people on the basis of color, all in the name of so-called democracy, anti-communism. I believe Ash asked in that section that she read, it says President Jimmy Carter's commitment to human rights and his dedication to race-neutral democracy. So race-neutral democracy. I'm gonna take my chances at trying to decode that, but I suspect, if I understand, coded language, doublespeak. First of all, democracy cannot exist under a system of white supremacy. It does not exist. And based on this reading, based on history, white supremacy, the system of white supremacy was strong and alive during this time. So democracy cannot exist. And then race neutral, race only exists to practice racism. So race neutral is a incomplete term, or I don't even know if incomplete is accurate to say, but that is also a term that can't exist. You can't be neutral when it comes to racism. You are either a victim of it or you are perpetuating it, in my view. So race neutral democracy, I have no idea what that term means. For me, I think it's supposed to distract people into, mainly victims of racism, into believing that democracy exists and it can be race neutral. I think that the evidence suggests that is not the case. That's what I had so far to contribute.
Thank you for answering the question. I agree about the race neutral part. It really seems to be put in there to make us think that, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. How can you be race neutral if you live under white supremacy? So if you're neutral is a feeling, right? Or it's an idea of acting as if something doesn't exist. So I thought that was interesting. And to me, that just means practicing racism. But on 78, I thought it was interesting when they talk about 100 members of the Invisible Empire, Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, armed with bats, clubs, and guns, attacked a civil rights demonstration. They inflicted major injuries and shot 2 civil rights demonstrators in the head and face. While the FBI did not find sufficient evidence to charge the Klansmen, the Southern Poverty Law Center would file a civil lawsuit that reopened the case. To me, throughout this whole chapter, was constantly reading about the very, the very conniving ways in which the white people in the government attempted to align themselves with these groups, probably fund them and provide them with weapons, and then at the same time pretending like they were doing something about it. It reminds me of what Neely Fuller says. I don't think I'm going to quote it correctly, but the white supremacist likes to play both sides or be on both sides of an argument. And it reminds me of just a lot of the times where the government or people in the government say, oh, it's out of our hands, we can't do it. But secretly, they're probably, I mean, it's very hard for me to believe that these people would amass these intense amount of weapons, machine guns, assault rifles. I think there were other military grade weapons that they had without anyone in the FBI or CIA knowing. They even said that in the Operation Red Dawn, that operation only had 8 people in it, and yet one of them was an FBI informant. It's very hard for me to believe that the United States government was not supporting these groups, and to have the Ku Klux Klan shoot people in the head and face, and the FBI did not find sufficient evidence to charge them, is very obvious. You know what the intentions of the FBI are for. It's to practice racism.
Yeah, it's highly suspicious, and I would say conniving is a definitely a fitting word, but I'll say very deceptive. And how it seems that the so-called government is letting these people get away with these, I would call, acts of terrorism. Like, and we're gonna learn of I'm gonna play a part of the text, because I think this is just a tiny snapshot of just awesome white power. And we have areas of the world known as Africa. We have those places known as like the Congo, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. All those places, we have mines there. And I don't know if those non-white people actually own those mines, and if they do own those mines, if they're able to use those mines to do what they will with them. And when I say mines, I'm talking about like the mines that produce the gold, the resources, the minerals, and whatnot. And we're gonna learn about. Just take a listen here.
White power activists focused keenly on Central America, traveling there with frequency. Louis Beam, a national-level movement leader, made several trips to Mexico and Costa Rica for reasons ranging from evading arrest to obtaining cheap medical care, participating in business ventures, and possible money laundering and arms deals. Members of the order had supplied the Contras and reportedly guarded a Costa Rican gold mine secretly owned by the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, an Arkansas white separatist group. The story about the mine may be apocryphal and cannot be verified in the archive. But by the mid-1980s, the order did regularly produce false Costa Rican identification for its members, as one member had spent time there. Movement interest in the region was marked and intense, if not fully illuminated, by archival sources. Although the number of veterans who became mercenary soldiers.
So I just wanted to, you have allegedly just white supremacist groups and whole other so-called countries. Like, these white people, they understand that, that so-called country of Nicaragua or Central America is not real. They are the conquerors and owners of all land, which is why they have no problem attempting to capture mines or say they own mines. And just that, a demonstration of awesome white power. I don't think we can name any Black groups or any non-white groups, that revolutionary groups, or any sort of political groups that non-white people are involved in, that they can allegedly say they have mines and they are able to manufacture identification cards for people. That's highly resourceful. If you're able to carry like passports to different areas of the world, that's I guess access. In order to be a successful terrorist, which many white supremacists are, you need access. And being white, especially being a white person who chooses to practice white supremacy, access is key. And it seems like these Tom Poseys and the Glenn Millers and the Louis Beams and the Don Blacks, they have a lot of access solely because they're white and they decided to practice white supremacy. And that decision seems to come with like awesome white power, because these aren't the best soldiers. They claim to be the best soldiers, but we're gonna learn about some fellas. I don't want to get their names wrong, but there's one of these race soldiers who calls himself a soldier, but he was a helicopter pilot who got shot down 3 times. You can't be the best pilot if you got shot down 3 times. I'm just following the logic. But anywho, I'll pause there, just see if folks want to share some of their notes.
Hey, I wanted to share some things if I can be heard.
Oh, please, yeah, you can be heard. Dr. St. Q.
Yes, sir. So, I kind of, I don't know if any of you were breathing around that time, but I was growing up in that era, and my father was he was a soldier for, well, let me just say this. My attempted father was a mercenary. And we were subscribed to Soldier of Fortune magazine, like that magazine. I grew up reading that magazine. I have all of the issues. They're all in storage right now, but I think the way it seems to me, the way a lot of white people practice racism is kind of like the way we have victims guarantee qualifications, right? It's kind of like a lot of white people practice racism. They, a lot of them disagree on how it should be practiced. And then you have those who agree. They work together. Those who agree on how it should be practiced work together, right? And then the ones who disagree, depending on the extent of the disagreement, if it gets to the point to where there has to be war, then if they got to use non-white people as the pieces, like pieces on a chessboard, to fight that war, then they will. But I wanted to say, at that time with Jimmy Carter, he was kind of more like he's like the first. And I don't know if you all remember how, if you see how a lot of Black people were, how they reacted towards Bill Clinton, like, so Jimmy Carter was kind of like the first one to really mesmerize the mind, the first president, to really mesmerize a lot of Black people with thinking that, he had their best interests at heart. And a lot of those attempts were made, or he made a lot of attempts to make it appear that way by, speaking out against South Africa and Rhodesia. And there was a number of African countries where you had Black people who were sick and tired of the injustices that they were going through, and they formed their own groups to fight. And the same thing happened in South America. You had a bunch of non-white people there who were forming their own groups to fight, and they were trying to fight against the individuals, who appeared to be in charge of their countries. And a lot of them found out that these leaders were being supported by the Western nations. And so there was I think a real effort to fight against what they were calling back then. They were calling it imperialism and colonialism, but it's white supremacy. There was a real effort to fight against that. And then the white supremacists who promote communism kind of manipulated those non-white people into believing that communism was going to be the way to fight against white supremacy. And so then you had all of these, the people that you mentioned, like Jim Beam and them, and none of them seemed like to be good soldiers to me. Most of those guys were not war heroes or nothing like that. Most of those guys became well known after they became mercenaries, right? And they were well, what do you call it? A lot of white people were glorifying them because, you know, of what they were doing. You know, also, I just wanted to say also too, the area of entertainment on television at that time, it was a lot of John Wayne and Charlton Heston and you know, you had these supposed to be macho, you know, white man. I'm the, you know, and, you know, fighting against the indigenous people, you know, the so-called Indians and Tarzan and all that kind of stuff. So you had a whole lot of that going on TV, and I could see how that would influence a lot of young white males to say, yeah, I'm going to go out and I'm going to fight. I'm going to be a hero. And then the last thing I wanted to say was, when it came to the FBI's involvement with the Ku Klux Klan, there's a book that Dr. Welsing recommends. It's called Race Matters. And the author of that book details how the Ku Klux Klan, I mean, the FBI had knowledge of a lot of stuff that the Ku Klux Klan was doing, but they would look the other way. And at the same time, they had informants in the Black Panther Party, and they were doing everything they could to tear that down. But that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Senku. Racial Matters by Kenneth O'Reilly, I believe is the text. It's definitely a text that we should all have in our brain computers. Yes, and thank you for sharing about Soldier of Fortune. We have this on the screen for context, because this text, this magazine was actually a recruiting mechanism for white supremacists. Probably still is. No,
it's out of business.
Oh, I know, but you know, the legacy still lives on of this.
Yeah, it really was a recruitment for mercenaries. Like I said, my dad, there were some jobs that he found in there that that he, you know, he did some mercenary work for them. And it just kind of depended. Like mercenaries are generally just you know, people with military experience who can be hired out privately. And so you had in a lot of those countries, like, okay, like you were talking about the mines. I can tell you now, none of those mines were owned by any non-white people at all. They were owned by wealthy white people, and not just the mines, the farmland, the pretty much every resource that you could think of that was an export out of those countries. They were exports being you know, sold, resources that are being sold to the Western nations. They were wealthy white people who had corporations that were controlling all of those resources, and the non-white people in those countries were trying to form you know, or organizations to fight against those corporations. And so what those corporations would do was they'd hire these mercenaries, but also the organizations hired the non-white organizations hired mercenaries as well. So they used mercenaries on every side, but mainly, like these guys, Jim Beam and all of them, they were going to these places and working for these or the governments of those places, like the you know, South African government hired a lot of mercenaries to do stuff, and the Contras, the Iran, you know, the Contras that were fighting in Nicaragua, that the CIA used crack cocaine to fund that war. The Contras, they were trained by mercenaries, most of them, but that came a little bit later. Anyway.
You mentioned earlier about how white people disagreeing about how others, white people, may choose to practice racism. And there's an excellent example of that right here, that leads to what is commonly known, what is known by counter-racist logic as a white sacrifice. Tom Posey demonstrates that here, where he says, Posey's battle cries featured a strong belief in God intertwined with virulent anti-communism. He would gladly shoot any American citizen who aided the cause for communism. I wouldn't shoot them as individuals, he explained. I would be shooting them as communists. For Posey, as the Greensboro shooters and others in the white power movement, killing communists provided an opportunity for like-minded combatants to join forces. Mercenary soldiers, civilians who fought for money and for free, and the anti-communist skirmishes of the Cold War honed an anti-democratic practice some will later use to structure acts of violence on U.S. soil. So lots of jargon about essentially saying white sacrifice, and just also demonstrates the Yoruba how they are able to just compartmentalize things and just separate, just no longer a person. You're not, the labels they attach to people, the American citizen, individual, just all these concepts that just allow it and make it easier for them to eliminate, especially non-white people, but even themselves. He's not killing a American citizen, which it could be decoded as a white person. He's decoding basically killing a race traitor, which is probably how a lot of these race soldiers viewed white people who were attempting communism. But I may be in error.
I agree, exactly. They saw them as race traitors, yeah.
Racism, white supremacy is a united independent system. That's what I see it as.
Agreed. And we just get I'm learning about just a lot of more details about a lot of acts of terror that I've seen celebrated by some modern day racists. Like for example, Dylan Roof was always celebrating and glorifying Rhodesia and the what went down over there. And we get some insight into that from this page on the PDF. On the tablet version, it's page 58, but maybe different depending on the version you have or the text you have. But it says, anyways, in Rhodesia, where between 1965 and 1980, as many as 2,300 American mercenaries defended the white minority rural government. Soldiers for hire included John Birch Society members and neo-Nazis. One gun dealer and former clansman who later sold a cache of 14 AR-15 assault rifles to the white power terrorist group, The Order, claimed to have been approached by people in Alabama who I am now told were undercover agents for the government about engaging in gun running to South America. Presumably CMA, although he declined to sell, the attempt reveals continued interconnection between the CMA and the white power movement. White power activists, I discovered that already. But yeah, so I guess what happened in Rhodesia was a bunch of I suspect non-white people were slaughtered by white people who were they're aided by the system of white supremacy, obviously, getting guns. That I've often seen it mentioned that what would happen if non-white people try to arm other non-white people in other areas of the world. I've seen that mentioned before, and it's always met with white people will probably destroy the people who are trying to do that. But it seems that white people are easily able to arm other white people, whether it be Israel or South Africa or Rhodesia. Hey, white people need guns. We're gonna find a way to get them guns. They're genetic equalizer, great equalizer.
One thing that I noticed throughout this chapter and this section is the involvement, the kind of I would even go as far as to say endorsement of this kind of activity by the US government. I think there are multiple times where the US government becomes aware of what it, or I'm not even going to say that they were never aware, but they're definitely aware of what is going on. And it was exposed that they knew what was going on. And there was nothing done about it. There was nothing, no justice produced, uh, no attempt to stop the mistreatment, nothing like that. I think where it's set on, I'm on page 99. It said the US legal system broadly failed to respond to the CMA incident, which theoretically constituted both kidnapping and a violation of the Neutrality Act. So one thing that I'm also thinking about is with the mercenaries is, as they go out to these other places on the planet and commit these acts of terrorism, there seems to be no so-called accountability by the US government. It doesn't seem like anybody, I'm not sure if anyone is, contacting the US government to say, hey, your people are over here, you need to come get them, something along those lines. And it just seems like this is a consistent theme throughout this, that the US government is aware and they're not doing anything about it. And really the non-white countries, the places where these non-white people are living, they're completely powerless to stop that, to stop the mistreatment from happening, stop the acts of terrorism. When the US is, at least I understand the US is very focused on immigration, and people suppose, think about what Donald Trump was talking about, people coming over here bringing drugs and guns and all sorts of crime, and then people from the US are going out to these countries and kind of doing the same thing. And there is no kind of response. I understand that, people who practice racism, white people, are largely hypocrites, but this is something that is consistent throughout this entire section. And I think it really says a lot of what to expect when you're dealing with the white people who may practice racism.
Great point. Also, too, just to mention, I can't remember if we mentioned it this time or last time, but this kind of reminds me of Snowfall a little bit, especially when it talks about how they're supplying, was it South America with the weapons? Or no, the CIA involvement in Central America. And anytime I hear CIA involvement or US involvement or something is being supplied, oh, they're being supplied guns, like just anything in that such, and even just organizational fraud, so many terms that just alert me to where it's like, okay, we know the involvement of white people or the US or white supremacists, and nothing is being done about it. The only thing we talk about is, oh, well, these places are corrupt, or oh, where they're helping someone, quote, helping, but then the corruption is still there, and it just goes downhill, and they find a finger to point, and then they start shooting people, and they're like, well, I'm just shooting the communists. This is not really an individual. It's not a human. It's I use human in quotes, but it's they almost use like these labels and titles to separate them from being a quote a human or a person. It's like, well, I'm not shooting an actual person. This is a dog. I'm just shooting a communist. So it's just very interesting, the information that's being provided, and even hearing these same terms be used today continuously. You mentioned Donald Trump, who consistently talked about immigration and bringing drugs, and you mentioned the hand in hand though. So it's almost like who to believe. Not me literally, but this misinformation of, oh well, we're trying to help, and it's all they've been corrupt since they're corrupt before we got there. Now we're trying to alleviate or better the situation. So this is very interesting. But I keep asking myself too, as I go along and listen and read this, is dang, so since this information is like public records, like people could read this, and there's countless other information that you could read and have, but
There's like, how do you counter this? Like, what do you do with this information other than know it?
To add, I think it also says a lot about the ability to use words by the white supremacists. There have been, as Nanaya mentioned with the terms, Congress. There's a section in here where it talks about Congress, how it passed laws to prevent the involvement of the U.S. government or the Reagan administration. On page 91. 91 in the book, it says, in the legislative branch, however, Congress attempted to stop the Reagan administration from waging war on the Sandinistas. Congressional limits and public reluctance drove the administration to increasingly covert methods. Through the CIA, the executive supported the Contras even as Congress passed a series of laws restricting US military intervention in Nicaragua. So reading further, it talks about the direct involvement. See that they're very slick with the words that they use, you know, talking about direct involvement. So they do things indirectly. So I've noticed that when they may be saying that they're going to do something, they will do that thing, but then they also leave out, you know, the other things that they're able to do. So maybe not direct involvement by directly sending military, militias, military forces, but they can do it indirectly through funding rebel forces or funding governments, as explained through the Iran-Contra war. So being very, just noticing the words. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied.
The indirectness is the job of the CIA. They call it covert operations, and that is the if you check out the CIA's website, they don't have any problems telling what their mission is, but the indirect stuff is what they do. Their job is basically to look at the places, the countries, so-called countries around the planet. If there's people in power or in so-called power that do not agree with the foreign policy of the United States, then they do what they can to try to get that person out of there. And they try to do what they call a coup, where they try to get somebody in there to replace that person that's going to be on their side. And a lot of that stuff was going on in the 60s because you had all these countries that were at first they were colonies, they were open colonies, and you had huge numbers of non-white people trying to do what Haiti had done, which is take over the colony and get independence and be free. And that was happening all over the world, and it kind of they squashed it after Haiti a little bit, and then when it kind of reintroduced itself with Castro in Cuba, and Castro got support from the communists, and then after Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam witnessed what Castro did, they kind of did the same thing in Vietnam, which they were, again, it was non-white people seeking help from communists to help them supposedly get their freedom. And then that happened in Angola, and it happened all over the planet. You had these groups of people, non-white people, looking for support from anybody really to help them get so-called free. In most of the circumstances, it was coming from the so-called communists, because those who were capitalists or whatever, they were practicing a different form of white supremacy. So, but that's what the CIA's job is to do, is to always do it indirectly, to do it real sneaky like, And for it seems like to me like there's some white people who are against that. There's some white people who don't want to. I guess maybe the ones who don't want to lose their sons in war, you know, on the other side of the planet, or the ones who don't want to lose their sons and you know, over oil or diamonds or something like that. But there's about 19 intelligence agencies that the United States has that are all working, you know, in a covert way.
This is all very fascinating. It should be a just very hopefully demonstration of what racism is and how it works, and just the awesomeness of white power. So I keep from this text, it's echoed over and over how the racist mindset, them losing that conflict known as the Vietnam War, that has really bruised their ego, because we often in this text hear throughout that they're trying to redeem the loss in the Vietnam War. She says that over and over, and these paramilitary racist white supremacist groups that Louis Beam and Tom Posey and Don Black and Glenn Miller's, all these folks who are arranging these groups are. I'm just gonna read right here because it says it better. It says here, although the number of veterans who became mercenary soldiers represents a very small percentage of the men who served in the Vietnam War, their activities made a profound impact, both in politics and in violence. In countries throughout the Third War, veterans who used their combat training in Vietnam to act as mercenary soldiers elsewhere brought the war's violence to new battlefields and new enemies. Between the 1960s and at the end of the Cold War, American mercenaries fought to preserve white minority rule and governments in Rhodesia, South Africa, and in Latin America and in the Caribbean. They propped up US-supported regimes, opposed leftist movements, and attempts to overthrow leftist governments. Some traveled back to Southeast Asia, where they supported anti-communist actors and regimes, and to Angola and the Congo, where they augmented US support of guerrilla factions that opposed the Soviet Union. So after losing in Vietnam, they're taking their what they've learned, and they're just unleashing a whole new violence on what she describes as new enemies, but just victims of racism. They're just spreading to all these areas of the world: Angola, the Congo, Southeast Asia. All these are race camps that white people have conquered, and it seems in the 1960s, in that area of time, white people were just having a blast, and we had this soldier of fortune thing being produced and circulated. This is just promoting absolute, from my logic, terrorism. What I'm describing here is literal acts of terrorism. White people being able to like amass themselves in small numbers and then go and say, hey, we're gonna help this victim of racism. We're gonna allow this victim of racism to have this regime where we're gonna allow him to just have all these people suffer and squalor. All these people are gonna die because of us, but we're gonna have this as our fall guy. A lot of people call these people like dictators or government puppets. But I just see them as victims of racism who are being used in a very incorrect manner. So that's what I see them when they say they are like installing anti-communist actors and whatnot. That's just practicing racism, white supremacy. And also how they're killing the non-white people is demonstrating that we're really mad about losing in Vietnam, and we're definitely not going to lose anymore. We're going to really kick these communists, these non-white people's asses wherever we meet them. And that was also demonstrated with the word gook. They kept calling the word gook is a racial slur that was popularized in the conflict known as the Vietnam War. But it says here from the text, even the word gook had made a transnational circuit, beginning as gugu to describe territorial subjects during the US conquest of the Philippines. The term gook migrated to the anti-communist war in Korea, was widely used to disparage enemies and civilians alike in Vietnam, and eventually became shorthand for the enemies of mercenary soldiers in various African countries. So it's just a glimpse into, hey, non-white people worldwide, hey, the average racist sees you as a gook, nigger, non-white person who is worthy to be targeted with the system of white supremacy, a system of terror. And this should be more than a motivation to want to solve this problem, whether we have been classified as Asian, Black, yellow, brown, red, whatever. If it means non-white, there's mercenary soldiers known as white supremacists who have a long record of mistreating us, and they seem to be willing to continue to do that. So that should be motivation to solve this problem.
I didn't want to interrupt, but the goo goo reference made me think about like what people will be like say to their babies sometimes, like goo goo gaga. I wonder if that's where that came from. But anyway, I also wanted to add, I think that is what the system of white supremacy is all about, the global system of white supremacy, that anywhere on the planet, if a white person, somebody classified as white, wants to go out and mistreat a non-white person based on color, they have those resources available to them. And that is anywhere on the planet. These wars are evidence of that. We may not be, the white supremacists may not be fighting in Brazil, but they're fighting somewhere else. So if you want to go mistreat some non-white people on this side of the planet, here are the resources you have available to you. These are all the things that we can use to get you over there to carry out your mission of practicing racism, to keep the power dynamic of white over non-white. And that is what I'm constantly seeing with this. The US government definitely, for all intents and purposes, is a part of that system. They are always giving out those resources. I imagine them as a headquarters. You know, they will get in contact with the people who are seeking these resources, and they'll make sure that they carry out the mission of practicing racism, white supremacy.
Thank you, Mr. Kwaku. That is a demonstration of the massive deception we have been led to believe. The so-called U.S. government, it's not even a real thing. You know, if the so-called U.S. government is supplying racists, is allowing racists to destroy and mistreat non-white people, then that's not a demonstration of the United States of America, because the United States of America should be a place that practices justice, not spreads terror. So that's just deception. The so-called U.S. government seems to just be a system of white supremacy, and it has fooled a large number of people of suspecting that this concept known as the United States is real. But it seems that hey, it's not. Just like the so-called justice system that allows the so-called justice system that allows Louis Bean to kidnap white women and blow up non-white people's headquarters, and they allow him to, walk, scotch-free. They allow Who else did it let off? There was when they tried to invade, a bunch of white people tried to invade some non-white area of the world, and they let one of them off. Here we go. I think it was Michael Purdue. They let off. No, it was Norris. Here we I have it right here. So I'm gonna
Talking
read
about the
right here.
Dominica, I think it was.
No, let me just finish this point here. It says Norris's acquittal revealed a legal system unprepared to understand or curb the white power movement's paramilitary violence. The plot looked unrealistic and badly managed. A Los Angeles Times headline, for instance, called it a tragic comedy of errors, and ATF agents jokingly referred to it as the Bayou of Pigs. But its significance should not be minimized. The plot revealed a rapidly militarizing white power movement. And in the case of Norris, who was effectively acquitted on the basis of his claim that he hadn't known any better, the U.S. court system underestimated the risk he posed. In the 2 years following his acquittal, Norris and another Dominican mercenary, Wolfgang Droege, would work with the Order, a terrorist group that carried out counterfeiting, armed robbery, and assassination in attempts to wage race war. So Norris and a couple of other white people, race soldiers, they attempted to invade a non-white area. I think it was during Operation Red Dog, and they got caught. But one of them was acquitted because he's able to say, "Oh, I didn't know we were going to, invade non-white people. I thought we were just, mercenary. I didn't know we were gonna." So you don't know you're a part of a terrorist organization. I don't think that's logical to even fathom that. But you have LA Times making it a joke. But this is just, I suspect, white people working together to practice deception. The so-called U.S. court system. I think that's deception. I don't think it exists. I'll pause there.
It seems to me that these so-called laws, which I guess are what white people say, write down, are largely meant to control non-white people. I think that the evidence suggests, based on what I read earlier with the Reagan administration, that there aren't really any consequences for white people who don't follow the law. And I mean, that's pretty much evident even today with all the white terrorist attacks, the police, the mistreatment people, mostly non-white people are suffering at the hands of so-called law enforcement, that there are no consequences for the white people who do not follow these laws, which is why I believe I could be misinformed about how mercenaries work. But I imagine that if you go out anywhere on the globe, you go commit acts of terrorism, that government that so-called government would be held accountable for that. But I don't see the same happening for the US government or the so-called US government. All I see is hypocrisy going on.
It won't, because so it's kind of more important to look. I mean, it's not just the United States, it's all of the Western nations. They all have white people who go out and become mercenaries to do this kind of stuff. But are you all when all of this stuff was going on back when I was growing up, there used to be a term that used to float around a lot. It was called one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And the meaning that I got from that term was, if the mercenaries are fighting in the best interest of the Western nations, they don't do anything. they're not a terrorist. They're considered to be a so-called freedom fighter. If they're not fighting in the best interest of the Western nations, then they're considered to be a terrorist.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that phrase before, but it definitely makes a lot of sense. It seems logical the way you put it to me.
Do y'all remember that quote earlier in the chapter? Excuse me. Kill them all, let God sort them out. Who is their God? Or who is the God this person was talking about? That kind of reminded me of when we did the review of the Time Machine from the early 2000s, where when the main character finds the little monstrous creatures who was responsible for letting them out, and the individual, the pale white individual, says we have to control how much they go out and terrorize the non-white people, otherwise they would just wipe them out. So since racism, white supremacy is a united independent system, and they're all guaranteed a racist guaranteed qualification, they can say or do whatever as long as it supports the system, then we should expect this conflict, but we shouldn't be confused by it. So it's basically anything goes as long as you're supporting the system. We'll make
Exactly.
we'll make it seem like we disagree with you, but that's just to confuse the non-white people. Or we could literally disagree with you, but as long as what is being done supports the system, go ahead and do it.
Is there a reason why this thing is $8.88?
No, you know what? There's a reason, and I suspect it could be a racially coded pricing. It could be just 88 Hell Hitler. It could be that going on there. Little racist inside joke for those who are in the know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
But to comment on what Miss Action says, there's a lot. We're learning about a lot of racist slogans that were used and just have become like solidified in pop culture, because you could hear like punk rockers, rock stars like Slayer, Metallica. They often Megadeth. They often quote these sayings that these white supremacists have actually uttered. You know, and there's another one that I'm gonna read from the text that it just goes. We should take this as an insight into the kind of mind we are attempting to counter, and either force them to eliminate all of the non-white people, or help us to establish justice, or if that is impossible, then to hopefully do something constructive about this race problem. Because I'm just gonna read here from the text. It says where should I? Oh, okay, here we go. One National Guard member, Henry Brasino, wrote that the guardsmen refer to Uchennis as a trainer rather than by military title, but added that he was still considered a high-ranking man and accompanied Somoza Porter Cotero wherever he went. Racino described Uchennis as a hero of the Vietnam War and the best instructor of a mountain of methods to kill, and kill some more. So if racist man, racist woman, racist child, if they are good at one thing, or effective at one thing, I would say it's killing. It's eliminating people, creatures, nature, whatnot. And they celebrate, they glorify this aspect about themselves. which, you know, we should just also thinking about, is that correct to brag about how well you are at killing, eliminate people? Sounds incorrect. Sounds quite insane, but you know, I'm just a non-white person. If folks want to share some notes, I should I continue?
I have, I wanted to bring something up I thought was interesting on page 94 when they said, when they're talking about Posey and his his mercenary work in Nicaragua, and they say, a Nicaraguan journalist asked if Posey, quote, was just a brutal and bloodthirsty mercenary, end quote, or if he worked for the CIA. Posey dodged the question. The reporter described Posey's mission as traveling to, quote, machine gun children and murder women, end quote. Posey described it as, for our boys, something like a well-deserved vacation. I thought that was a very interesting thing to say, especially, I mean, what I got from a lot of this section about the mercenary work that was done was they talked a lot about how it was based on really the civilians as targets, which reminds me of it was in Iraq. I know there was like mercenaries that killed a lot of civilians. It was like in 2007, I believe. Betsy DeVos, she worked for Trump under Trump last when he was president as the Department of Education, I believe. Her brother ran a mercenary company called Blackwater, and they were, I guess, indicted in a massacre that happened in Iraq. A lot of civilians died. But that line I thought was so interesting because it reminds me so much of these like mass shooters. Like the reporter described Posey's mission as traveling to machine gun children and murder women. Like that sounds exactly like Peyton Gendron and Brendan Tarrin. It's so interesting how their names rhyme. It reminds me of them like going out of their way to murder very defenseless groups of people that do not have weapons training. It seems like you're fighting against the lowest hanging fruit, like the most least likely to be able to defend themselves. I just thought that was really interesting, and I think it's a part of what the book is trying to talk about. Is really like bringing the war home, because it's not just people who worked as soldiers in the Marines, etc. It's like regular, everyday white people. They also internalize a lot of this, and they become what they believe to be like mercenaries here. So I thought that was interesting.
I want to say too, when they were doing that back then, they were doing that so much that the non-white people that they were slaughtering and stuff, some of those organizations decided to start training the children and the females in military training. They started doing military tactics to help defend themselves in their villages, especially in Angola. They did that a lot in Angola, and they won. Oh, and Zimbabwe, with Rhodesia, which is Zimbabwe now, but they spent a lot of time. The ANC set up camps so that these people could go to these camps and train themselves to defend themselves against the opposition, the mercenaries and stuff.
Yeah, these I'm looking for, here we go. Okay, so we have just the we mentioned earlier a tiny bit about how just the so-called U.S. government would use language to just like during Vietnam, they use language to describe just large numbers of killing, like, you know, body count. And what's the body count? We have to increase the body count. We see that taking place here, where these white supremacist groups who are very small in number, but are able to just leave a large number of dead people behind them. And the same thing is taking place because the likes of the usual suspects, racist men and racist women, they cool. Okay, so it says here, between its official U.S. military training and the arrival of the Soldier of Fortune teams, the battalion had massacred nearly 1,000 civilians, more than half of them children, in the village of El Mozuto, or Mozut. Battalion members stabbed and decapitated some victims and shot others with bullets manufactured for the U.S. Army and stamped Lake City, Missouri. The Salvadorian military encouraged these abuses with its own anti-communist training, but the presence of American mercenary trainers correlated with civilian targeted violence. In 1983, a story in Washington Post anticipated the impact of the kind of dehumanizing rhetoric espoused by the mercenaries. The reporter recounted a soldier of fortune. Oh, I don't have to read that part. But yeah, just it's just how they use language to dehumanize, and just how they literally will kill large numbers of people, you know, civilians, and just their business. This is to be expected, and that trope, that cliche, that lame racist cliche of, hey, I'm gonna dress up in body armor and go kill the most powerless, pitiful group of people on the planet, non-white people. That's what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna creep through the swamp with my bayonet, creep up in a hut and stab some non-white people who don't even know what a combat knife, AR-15 bayonet is. They don't real, you know. And this is what Gingrich, Brennan Tarrant. This is what they did. You know, dressed up in body armor to go kill people shopping for a tomato soup. You know, just this is the kind of terrorists we're dealing with. It seem to be very cowardly. Super easy to kill people who don't know they're coming from. You know, but they want to have fun, and this is what the system is all about. The system demands that Ginter as patron, like these people need to exist, and their targets, people like myself, 0526, non-white people worldwide.
I find it odd too that in all of these Soldier of Fortune magazines, they're always putting adventure. Like, I've so far, most of them, the ones that you put, they have like written adventure in there. I just find it really interesting. Is what Dr. Sinky was talking about, is the kind of propaganda that they were watching at the time. The like, I don't know, maybe like Charles Bronson type stuff. But I just thought it's interesting too, because especially when it comes to like people who are killing women and children, is like, don't adventures come with risk? And it's like, this is like, how much risk were some of these people really dealing with when they're like in full body armor and they're gonna, you know, attack a village or something like that. I just think that's interesting, that the idea of the adventure.
I think it's supported by a lot of the propaganda in the system, even thinking about so-called video games, supports those kind of activities. For a lot of the white people who carry out these acts of terrorism, it's like a video game for them. They're living out their fantasy in real life, the fantasy that they've been playing for years. They live it out and they take it out on non-white people. I think also it's worth mentioning, I mentioned in the past, is that what I have noticed, especially reading this text, is that the white people and largely involved are dissatisfied with the way the government, the so-called government, has been treating them, whether they being mistreated by other white people. But rather than go after the white people who are mistreating other white people, or the white people, they focus on the non-white people, attacking them. And I'm starting to like wonder, or because I don't know if that is actually being taught to them. I mean, it could be that it's being taught to them, but the response to go after non-white people who are powerless, who didn't contribute to their circumstances, the white people I'm talking about, like the Vietnam veterans that went to war, you know, they will admit that the so-called US government failed them, let them down, and they're disappointed, but then they target that at non-white people. I'm just wondering if maybe is that even learned? I don't even know if that, I'm trying to think, it may not be learned.
Well, I wanted to say, I know I haven't completely finished reading Peyton Gendron's manifesto, but I did read so some of the manifestos that I've read from some of these mass shooters, the ones that were open about their racism, they were saying it's their attempt to start a physical race war. Their attempt is to get Black people so upset. At least this is according, to some of the manifestos. It's an attempt to get you so upset about them attacking innocent Black people that Black people take arms and get out in the streets. And this is it's like a provocation. It's a thing that they're trying to provoke to happen. At least from my observation, I do believe though that because at the same time they're doing this, they're sending a message to others to copy them. And so, those of you who can, if you should start thinking about getting yourself a firearm, legally, and following all the processes that you need to follow to make sure you have it, and start going to the range and training, and just finding ways to protect yourself, because grocery stores, churches, playground, wherever you're at, it's it's all open season. And then I wanted to say, it seems to me that a lot of these mercenaries back in the day, when they went to these places, it was as if they didn't have anything else to do. Here in the United States, because coming back from Vietnam, a lot of Vietnam veterans, because they lost the war, were looked down upon. It was work was, from my understanding, from just thinking about the different veterans that my dad was a vet as well, and some of the conversations I used to hear them all talking about, it was hard to find work, and here it is, there's somebody offering you money to do a skill that you've learned in the military, and at the same time you're getting, as a white person, you're getting a chance to kill some non-white people, and it's okay, because you're in a system of white supremacy. No one's concerned about if you mow down a village of non-white people. Who cares if it's a secret, and if it gets out, some white people will find out about it, some non-white people will find out about it. All they're going to do is just raise some hell about it. But when you look, no, there was no charges brought against any of these people for what they did. So.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of this mercenary work was simply, you know, a free ticket. I hate to describe it that way, but that's what it seems, a free ticket to just go maim some non-white people and have fun doing it. And we've got some new artillery for you. You want to test out some new guns? I remember watching a documentary on Panama, and I suspect they were victimized in this manner. You know, a bunch of white people going over there and terrorizing them. But I remember just hearing testimonies of what they experienced, of just white people coming there and just, you know, yeah, they had guns that just shot the car in half. You know, just, oh wow, and you didn't have any gun like that. No gun, no nothing, just came. Yeah, that's how the racists would do it. You know, they love maiming non-white people, especially if they are not facing any potential harm. And with them being so just angry at losing the conflict in Nam, it just seems that we're taking how they beat us, the ambushes, and you know, the guerrilla warfare. We're gonna take that and we're gonna terrorize the civilians with it. That's what we're gonna do. You know, ambush some civilians. You know, this is a really sick. This is sick stuff we're learning about. You know, these mercenaries, you know, can easily be also called terrorists if someone is just doing a little bit logical thinking. You know, also right here, I want to just, they're really depraved. These mercenaries, just these racists who I ain't got nothing, like what you said, I ain't got nothing else to do. Let's see how many kills I could get in Angola, Rhodesia. You know, I hear the white farmers need my help. Anyways, so let's read here from another depraved racist. He says, far from decrying, this is page 66 from the ebook. Far from decrying such practices, some mercenaries boasted about their association with brutal regimes and units. At a 1985 Soldier of Fortune convention, firearms editor Peter Kokalis proudly introduced himself as a member of the Al-Qaeda battalion to roars of approval from the crowd. Kokalis alluded to killing communists as target practice. Remember, when it comes to police brutality, that's the fun part of police work, Kokalis joked. Then he brandished a short-barreled assault rifle. I'm going to take it down to El Salvador to try it out on a variety of targets. Kokalis and his contemporaries spoke of guerrilla insurgents as targets, gooks, and animals rather than human beings, recycling the body count rhetoric of Vietnam War and a renewed anti-communist mission. You know, I'll just easily say renewed renewed, you know, direct violence, race war against non-white people. And then the language is so coded and so example of just the Yurugu and how they just separate, compartmentalize everything, because they eventually start to say, there are a number of racist jokes in here, but there's one racist joke that they said El Salvador is just Spanish for Vietnam, something like that. They said. Let me see if I can find the direct quote. Here it is. It says, it says neoconservative William F. Buckley printed it a column titled Nicaragua, Another Vietnam. And the National Review, as the administration received thousands of letters against intervention in Central America. some opponents distributed a popular bumper sticker that read, El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. So just, we're gonna find some non-white people and we're gonna get some revenge because we didn't like how them yellow boys kicked our asses, even though, they won the battle, so-called Vietnam conflict, but they're still winning the global race war. So-called people who are in Vietnam, do they look like, victors of the system? Or do they still have a number of clinics treating victims of racism, experiencing, chemical agent orange poisoning? So it's just, this is what we're dealing with. This is a race war.
Yeah, William F. Buckley was a very popular racist that back then. I know James Baldwin had a debate against him.
I think that's very interesting. Yeah, and when it's time for these people to like face charges or crimes with the so-called government, lets them off the hook, or they say they give really lame excuses, like right here on page 68. It says the State Department made a statement immediately after the CMA helicopter crash. So I think this is the helicopter crash that involved a couple of race soldiers that killed, I think, let me go get the correct information. Yeah, 2 died. It was Dana Parker and James Powell. No, was he let's see here. All right, well, I'm just gonna get my my point across. There was the helicopter crash, just a suspected terrorist attack that the people we were discussing attempted to do. Anyways, when it's time for the people to get some sort of accountability, this is what is said. The State Department made a statement immediately after the CMA helicopter crash, claiming that the CIA did not send the mercenaries and suggesting that the Contras might have turned to them to fill battlefield shortages caused by congressional cutoff of U.S. aid in May. While this language of shortages hinted that the mercenaries unofficially furthered the Reagan administration agenda, it also allowed the CIA to avoid taking any direct responsibility for mercenary violence. As a State Department official told the Los Angeles Times, there was no connection between the raid and the US government. We can't prevent wild men from doing wild things. By writing off the mercenaries as wild, insane, uncontrollable, and beyond the limits of society, the administration disavowed the agents of its own violence. So it's just using a lot of jargon to justify, hey, why these people are not being tracked down and taken more seriously. They're just wild, insane, uncontrollable. Even a powerful, system of justice, U.S. government can't wrangle them. They're just that powerful, wild. So I have it here, that helicopter crash, but my tablet is acting up. So that's all I had to say about that. Folks can continue sharing their notes.
I also think it's worth mentioning too, the mention of immigration in this, uh, where they talk about, I mean, throughout the book, really, where they talk about as the white supremacist so-called U.S. government continues to go to war, uh, that a lot of the countries in which they are attacking, El Salvador, yeah, can't say that one, Nicaragua, Vietnam, etc., that a lot of the people there end up going to the U.S. And it's interesting because they, we sometimes non-white people get in arguments about immigration and people coming and trying to tell those non-white people to stop, but it really doesn't even matter because as long as the U.S. government, the white supremacist, keeps going to war, keeps destabilizing those areas of the world, they're going to keep taking immigrants, and they're going to keep coming. They're going to keep, yeah, and it's not going to stop. It just, I guess it reminds me of where the focus needs to be.
And it's just not the it's all of them. It's they're all fighting wars around this planet. It just seems like it's just the so-called U.S. government, but all of the Western nations are actively fighting. Right there at the top of the Soldier of Fortune magazine, where it says French Foreign Legion today, I just wanted to say out of because some of you probably, I mean, I don't know if any of you know or not, but the French Foreign Legion is a mercenary organization. That's the government of France's mercenaries. They're a group of mercenaries that France contracts out to whoever needs the French Foreign Legion.
Interesting. I didn't even know that. See, going back to the CIA, you can find all pretty, I don't know if it's all of their evidence, but you can find certainly an amount of evidence that, they're telling people exactly what they're doing. And, they're telling people exactly what they're doing, but I don't know how to say it. It's like they're admitting what they're doing, destabilizing other places on the planet. Not just the CIA. I'm gonna get better at trying to. It's really the racist government of the planet. They're telling you exactly what they're doing, and I guess it's just kind of allowed. Really, no non-white person on the planet can stop them. So that's just interesting to me. The French Foreign Legion, I'm sure that there are a number of other mercenary groups, just more evidence really that these organizations are out there, they exist.
It reminds me too of I watched a video a couple months ago about Israel, and they interviewed all the people who worked for like the IDF, which is like the Israeli defense. It's basically their army, and also people who just worked as police officers there. And they asked them, "Oh, where do you come from?" And they're all white people from like Palos Verdes, California. Some people said like Torrance, California. Some people said they were all like white people from Europe and other parts of America. I thought that was so interesting. It reminds me of this because it's like they're leaving their country to go to this country filled with what I presume to be non-white people. And like Soldier of Fortune, they're acting as these type of mercenary forces. Obviously, they're not necessarily because they get Israeli citizenship, but I feel like it's the same idea, because a lot of the Palestinians who get terrorized are always like, they always do things like attack women and children. They recently killed a female reporter. They reduce their access to water. A lot of times you'll see them attacking like very young Palestinian boys, like 16, 17, calling them like, like they're trained soldiers, when they're just throwing like one of those like handmade, like things like that. Like, I just think it's very interesting. It reminds me of the same thing. It's like, it's very interesting how this type of mercenary type work is done in different ways.
Yeah, a lot of things that should be hammered in there is that, yeah, these mercenaries, they come from all walks of white life. Like, there's yeah, this is a very common trope. And when I was more confused, I used to think, I was aware mercenaries make a lot of money. I'll be a mercenary one day, you know. But I was not understanding that I'd be getting paid to just support the system of white supremacy in a really brutal, very brutal manner. So Operation Red Dog, I mentioned it earlier. So it was an attempt of a group of race soldiers to attempt to invade Grenada. And some of those people were Michael Norris and Michael Perdue, and I believe Don Black. But just this whole debacle just sheds a lot of insight on, and just what I said insight, and I was gonna say evidence, and what I've been saying, that the conflict in Vietnam really did something to the so-called American ego, its mindset, the white supremacist mindset at the time. So I'm going to read here things that echo
white people law.
Yep. So it says the first iteration. Actually, do I need the? Yeah, I'm going to read quite a bit, I suppose. The first iteration of their plan revealed that the Operation Red Dog mercenaries saw themselves as acting in service of the state. Though they quickly abandoned this plan for lack of manpower, they had hopes of invading Grenada. The Reagan administration itself would invade Grenada just 2 years later under more official auspices, but using a notably similar anti-communist ideology. Black frequently spoke of the similarity in rhetoric and objectives that he thought connected the Klan with the Reagan administration, always claiming he had acted patriotically even when he broke the law. We were military advisors, and our purpose was to stabilize and secure the island against communists. Black later told a reporter, had we been successful, it would have been in the best interest of the United States. Black's comment about Dominica echoed Reagan's talk about stabilizing and securing Grenada when referencing successful US interventions. In other words, white power mercenaries positioned themselves within a state ideology of covert action that itself constituted a form of paramilitarism. Reagan would later describe the Grenada invasion as the beginning of the end of American self-doubt and national confusion in the wake of the Vietnam War. So after getting kicked around by the people white supremacists call yellow, the yellow boys, known as Vietnamese people, it really left them in just distraught, it seems, national confusion. We don't know who we are. We thought we were the best killers in town. We had all these bombs and these planes and all this artillery, but they just kept coming out the ground. They came out of the trees, they came out of the jungles. It was a very frightening experience. So now we got to go kick around all the non-white people we could find, preferably where there's no trees in tall grass because we've proven that that's not how we can do things. We need flat surfaces. So, Grenada, South America, those what do they call them? Those favelas that we allow to live in. Yeah, we'll go terrorize those places now because you can't do the jungle anymore. That's what I'm getting, from this.
Yeah.
I mean, Mr. Dr. Security, am I correct or am I confused?
I think you are. You're close. You're close, sir. It's interesting you mentioned Grenada because I was there like 2 months before the invasion, and similar situation. Okay, like I said, all over the planet. So Vietnam, what happened in Vietnam inspired non-white people all over the planet. Like what happened in Cuba, what happened in Vietnam, it inspired just like with Haiti when in the 1800s when the Haitians first fought against the French and flipped the whole thing upside down, and it spread like wildfire. All over the planet you had non-white people who heard about it and were trying to do the same thing. Okay, so when it happened in Vietnam and when it happened in Cuba, everybody was like, and Korea, when it happened in Korea, you had non-white people all over the planet saying, hey, communism, this might be the thing. This is what we need to fight against. They were calling it, like I said, they were calling it imperialism and colonialism, but it was white supremacy. And they thought that communism and socialism was the solution. So what happened with Grenada, because I know this because we met with the prime minister there, and the prime minister that was there before, he was a puppet, like the term you mentioned earlier, right? He was terribly misguided and confused, and the incorrect government was he was basically he was a dictator and he was a tyrant, and the people of Grenada got tired of him, and they chose Maurice Bishop to be their leader, and they had a coup, so to speak. They took over the country while the guy that was there before, Eric Gary, the victim of white supremacy that was there before Eric Gary, he had left. He knew what was about to happen to him, so he flew to the United States to seek refuge, and then they took over the government in Grenada, and they called it they renamed. They kept the name of Grenada, but they named the government the New Jewel Movement. And so I was with a group of teenagers. I was a teenager too. We were just a group of us Black kids that we flew down there with so-called adults or whatever who they wanted us to see, to be exposed to I guess a democratic socialist environment, just to kind of see what democratic socialism looked like when it was in existence or whatever. When we got there though, and we told the people we were from the United States, they were like, oh, we're going to be invaded. We see the spy planes, they're going to be invading us, and we're preparing. And everybody on the island, they had a militia, so they had a people's militia. So everybody on the island, include the children, women, men, everybody on the island were training. With they were doing military training. And I remember there was a base, not a base. The United States called it a base as their excuse for invading the place, but Maurice Bishop saw that tourism. He was trying to increase the economy of the island, and they believed that tourism was going to be the best way to make money. So they started building an international airport. And this is what Bishop told us. We were sitting down with him, and he told us, he said that he went to the United States because they were closer. you know, and he knew about the bad relations that they had with the communists of Russia and Cuba and all this stuff. And he didn't want to be involved in that, but he needed their help. So, you know, he asked them for some money to help them build the airport, this international airport, and all they offered him was $5,000. So he said he went to the USSR and they loaned the Grenada $5 million. And then the Cubans, Castro offered some engineers to come and build the international airport. And we were there. Pan Am, I don't even think Pan Am even exists anymore, but it was an international airline called Pan Am, and it was another one called TWA. And I remember they had bought their spaces there already. We went to the airport and saw where they had bought their stalls already. And just the whole mindset of the people there was to, just to give an idea, right? We're on a bus, you know, a big bus, and we were trying to go to what was the name of that place? I think it was called St. George. It was the main city in Grenada, and they had like a market where everybody's selling their stuff. And we got on the bus, and the lady, there was an older lady on the bus. We were almost there, I think, and she was like, I left my shoes, because some shoes she wanted to take down there to get repaired. The bus driver turned the whole bus around, and everybody on the bus, we just went back to where she was, to her place, so she could go in and get her shoes. And there was no, you know, no cussing, or nobody was upset. It was like extremely laid back. And there was one guy that was walking around with us when we were down there touring the island, named Abraham, and he was a thief. Everybody knew him as a thief. Like everybody wherever we went, they would say, "Hey, that guy you're walking with, he's a thief. Don't trust him. He's a thief." You know, and it was just like the absence of crime, the absence of you know, this tension of thinking that, you know, you're gonna die, you know, because of some mass shooters or whatever. All that fear and all that kind of stuff was going out, was you know, it just wasn't anything like that. You know, you just didn't feel that kind of, it was so, man, I got all off of what you were talking about, because I guess I was just flashing back. But all over the planet, you had people who wanted that type of environment, right? Like so you had these groups of people all over the planet trying to do the same thing, and they saw what happened in Vietnam. They saw that and by the way, France was involved in the Vietnam War too. They saw that France and the United States lost that war, and thought, okay, you know, we need to take on communism. So you had all these countries all around the planet, mostly non-white people, taking on communism, and then, you know, the USSR basically, along with the other Western nations, they just started playing chess. They split the countries in half. Like Nicaragua had, you know, one group of victims of racism who said they were communists, and another group of victims of racism who said they were capitalists, and they're fighting each other. They had the same thing in Korea, and before the Vietnam War, it was the same thing in Vietnam, right? Because I mean, before the Vietnam War was won, when they had it, it split Vietnam in half. You know, part of Vietnam became North Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese were the ones who supported communism, and then the other part was South Vietnam, which were the ones who were the, you know, so-called capitalists. And, you know, like I said, this was happening all over the planet. And, you know, I think people looking back on it today, like someone like me, could look at it and say, okay, you know, it was all white supremacy. It was all racism, white supremacy. But, you know, you had these highly skilled I'm suspecting that maybe the communists and the socialists are kind of like the white liberal, like, the racist liberal that's just extremely deceptive about how they do it, but yeah, what you said sounded pretty accurate, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sankey. That makes a lot of logical sense. And just tragic. I would love to see, if I ever love anything at all, it would be just non-white people adopting, like attempted counter racist logic, attempted counter racism. That would be much more suitable than communism. It's very tragic that many of non-white people attempted to use this to help them to fight the system of white supremacy, when this concept of communism originated from the system of white supremacy itself, from Mr. Karl Marx. But nonetheless,
I have a question for Dr. Senq, and really anybody else here on the panel if they want to ask or answer. But you mentioned, Haiti and Vietnam and kind of the effects it had on non-white people throughout the globe. Do you think the same thing is happening right now in the area of the world known as Sri Lanka?
I don't know. I haven't heard what's going on in Sri Lanka.
Well, to the knowledge that I have available to me, it seems that they are overthrowing their so-called government there. That's as much information I have on it.
Oh, okay. Well, it could be. It could be. It depends on who's who's supporting that government. Sri Lanka. I think that's near. Is that near India? Let me look on that.
I'm not sure. I think it's Southeast Asia, somewhere maybe next to Cambodia.
Okay, so it could be a lot of those areas were like either French or British territories at some point. So if you look to see who's supporting, who's saying, if they're saying right now, if the powers that be, if the Western nations are saying that the government of Sri Lanka needs to be overthrown, and they're mistreating the people, then they're most likely not. And then vice versa. You know what I'm saying? Like if they're saying, that the people that are trying to overthrow the government of Sri Lanka. I'm glad you mentioned it though. I'm going to check it out later on. Because all of this talk is making me think about, because I used to, my attempted dad and I, back then in the 80s, we were monitoring this stuff like constantly, right? And I kind of like stepped away from it to see what's going on now, but I do see, it looks like to me that they're trying to, all that period, the racist white supremacists refer to that period as the Cold War, which, basically all these wars that we're talking about now were not official. So they weren't considered to be wars. So they called it the Cold War because it didn't have their official stamp of approval. But I see that getting ready to start now again, it looks like, and it looks like just like back then it was the USSR, which no longer exists. It's Russia, but Russia was a part of the USSR back then. It looks like that's going to start happening again, where you're going to see countries, probably non-white countries around the planet, that are getting some kind of support from Russia. And the country will be divided. Somebody in the country is going to get support from the Western nations, and then somebody else will get support from Russia. But I think it looks like that's about to happen again.
Yeah,
So
it's
maybe,
happening in. I'm sorry, Mark.
so maybe that's happening. What'd you say?
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying, so maybe that could be what's going on in Sri Lanka. There may be some support from both sides there. But I see it looks like to me like they got a lot of use out of the Cold War period. That was a time that you had people always afraid that World War that it was going to be a nuclear war. I think they got a lot of mileage out of that. So I think they're going to start trying to remind people that, hey, yeah, we're on the verge of this. We're on the verge of World War III.
Yeah, what you were saying reminds me of, that's how the Syrian war is right now, because Russia backs the president Bashar Assad, and the US backs, well, they were backing ISIS for a while, and then the people that they back are quote unquote called moderate rebels, which sometimes doesn't really mean anything. But so they're doing that now in a lot of different places in the Middle East, like Iran too is supported by Russia and China. So I think that's interesting. And also, oh, I forgot what you said. The last thing that you said, it reminded me of something, but it escapes my mind, so it's okay.
So I wanted to talk about this fella one more time. This is Michael Echenis, and he's mentioned in the text, and he's quite a significant race soldier, it seems, and he may be responsible for a lot of people dying, more than 30,000, it seems. But my tablet just spazzed out on me, so I got to go back to the highlighted section I was going to read. But this is him stalking through posing for a soldier of fortune, highly celebrated figure. And it says here, Somoza Porto Carrero recruited the Chenas and another veteran, Charles Sanders, specifically to teach the skills they had learned in the Vietnam War. In 1977, Somoza took command of the Basic Training Infantry School, EEBI, within the elite Nicaraguan National Guard. U.S. advisors had formed the National Guard to quell the nationalist insurrection led by Sandino in the 1930s. By 1972, the U.S. trained unit had claimed the lives of more than 30,000 of Somoza's political opponents. Indeed, Somoza kept control of the National Guard even during his brief ouster as president, thus retaining control of Nicaragua itself. In 1978, a series of candid interviews given on the condition that they could be published only posthumously after he dies, run all post-harmoniously. I said it wrong again, but continue. And Echenis told Los Angeles Times that he had risen to a position of leadership within the National Guard and the EEBI. I run all unconventional warfare training for the Guard, and Echenis told the reporter. I run all operations and intelligence on counter operations against the Sandinistas. I have a $5 million budget, and I got another $1 million and 6 colonels to set up a special anti-terrorist division. And Echenis also described his long personal war against communism. I hate communists for what they did to my people in Vietnam. He said, I've got 6 AK-47 holes in my body. So it seems like he may have been the terrorist. I wouldn't say that he was involved in any sort of anti-terrorist organization if he's responsible for 30,000 people being eliminated. And it wasn't to produce a system of justice, and it was totally just not a constructive use of killing people, I would say. But yeah, highly celebrated figure, and it's very suspicious that he said that he only wants this interview allowed out after he dies. Now I'm almost led to believe that he may have like just faked his death, and because he's well aware of all the war crimes he's committed or something like that. But I may just be highly confused. He may have just died having fun, attempting to raise some village and got shot down or shot up. But highly celebrated figure here. Right here.
He was doing covert operations, so he didn't want that to be known until after he was dead. If that interview would have got out while he was still doing what he was doing, it would have exposed, it would have been a scandal. That would have been a big scandal. I think like Watergate or something.
I just want to share this little quick Rosie moment. I just noticed. We have wearing black night fighting uniform, Echinus prepares to hurl razor edge shuriken, and he just donned and all the black. And just fascinating character.
Yeah, he wrote a book, a couple of books on knife fighting that I have.
Yeah, just total savagery.
Yeah, in my days, like you with your confusion wanting to be a mercenary, yeah, I did too. So I was training for it.
It seems yeah, total incorrect insanity also. So yeah, well, we mentioned earlier that these were not good soldiers. They're race soldiers, So a race soldier has no so-called honor, nothing that they do is so-called correct. It's all very evil. Whereas a soldier, like myself, a prisoner of war, I'm attempting to do correct things, like produce a system of justice and put an end to all this evilness on planet Earth, where people are allowed to just perish and be destroyed by white people, or at least the white people who practice racism. So these are really lame soldiers. Michael Purdue, Don Black, Willis Bean, they're lame. They're attacking powerless, pitiful people who 9 times out of 10 don't even know that a war is being waged against them. So I want to talk about Michael Purdue. This is quite interesting and something to laugh at, even though nothing is funny here. Michael Purdue falsely claimed Green Beret experience in Vietnam. He was convicted of petty theft and thrown out of the Marines before he could be deployed overseas, and boasted of a long and fabricated record of mercenary combat in Uruguay, Rhodesia, and Nicaragua, charged with violating the Neutrality Act, which prohibited American citizens from engaging in combat in countries which the United States had not declared war. Most of the 10 would-be Dominican mercenaries pleaded guilty. Of the 3 who did not, only one walked free, 21-year-old Alabamian Michael Norris. Although Norris had been affiliated with both the KKK and the neo-Nazi group National Alliance prior to the Dominican attempt, his defense was gullibility. He claimed he didn't know any better and stumbled into mercenary action by accident. The first we have Michael Perdue, who's like doing what a lot of white people call stolen valor. You pretend to be a soldier. You know, that's something they view as correct. Hey, you're not really a white person that went out and killed for white supremacy. You're not really, you know, they call that stolen valor. So even though he's doing that, he still got quite a bit of glory choosing to practice racism and white supremacy, even though he wasn't allowed to do it in a manner where he's attacking people in Vietnam. And then we see Michael Norris. Again, we mentioned him earlier, and I touched on this a tiny bit, but how he was able to avoid, you know, him and more white people attempted to invade Dominica. In my era, I said Grenada earlier, but it seems like it was Dominica. He attempts to, you know, this is not like a something you plan overnight. You know, there had to be like, you know, probably months of preparation, meeting people, gathering of equipment, but he's still able to say, I didn't know I didn't know we're about to invade a country. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, he had to know something, and that he could have been charged with something quite serious, but it's white supremacy. You know, we kind of want white people who want to practice racism. We want them to be able to do something like this. They're demonstrating awesome white power here, and that should continue, and it will continue as long as the system is in place. And Michael Norris walking free is proof of that. Because what was he able to do after he walked free? You know, 2 years later, he's working with the Order, you know, a known terrorist white supremacist group. They're counterfeiting, they're robbing banks and assassinating people to provoke a race war. Well, not to provoke a race war, because the race war has been started a long time ago. They're attempting, I would say, to intensify the race war, you know, to increase the death, perhaps, or to allow it so that more white people are allowed to kill more non-white people. Because I suspect if non-white people actually attempted to fight back, you know, just without any sort of plan, we just attempted to just go kill white people, we get crushed pretty fast, you know. But I may be in error, and that may be why they want to provoke that, because they know that they have way more guns than us and the ability to use those guns. But just continuing with my notes, we have here just the trauma that the Vietnam War has placed into the white psyche, perhaps the white supremacist psyche, I should say. But it says here on that invasion attempt also demonstrated that Dominica was one of just several countries that the Western Hemisphere that these activists understood as the front lines of the global war against communism, which easily replaced that word communism with non-white people. Two longtime mercenaries who had been enlisted for the Dominican plot, Frank Camper and Robert Linsby, had run multi-week mercenary camps for years, recruiting trainees through Soldier of Fortune. In March 1981, the month before the planned Dominican invasion, they were arrested with a dozen mercenaries in training when they conducted paramilitary training exercise that ventured too close to Central Florida nuclear reactor for the comfort of the local police. They were carrying military-style identification in Spanish when they were arrested, and Linsby told a reporter for the Los Angeles Times that they were preparing for deep jungle warfare. So, and again, this is after Michael Norris is acquitted from attempting to invade Dominica. Oh no, this is before, but he is still acquitted after this fact. Highly, highly suspicious. And also, this highly popular magazine that by the time we finish this book, we're gonna have displayed most of the covers. But this text here, this magazine, Soldier of Fortune, I feel like this is a highly constructive information that one can learn a lot from. But at the same time, powerful piece of racist propaganda, because this is the racists just telling us what they're doing, you know, killing people for fun, bragging about it, celebrating their races, you know, and in tribute to Michael Achena's, you know, there was another guy I saw earlier they had a tribute to. Well, yeah, this was a recruiting, you know, how many did Dylan Roof read this text? You know, Kyle Rittenhouse, you know, Ethan Crumley, you know, Nicholas Cruz. I suspect a number of white people who are motivated and dedicated to practicing racism. This text and information like it, Soldier of Fortune, highly important into teaching white people not just how to practice racism, but how to do it with explosives, with guns, with knives, you know, military style, I suppose. Yeah, and the greetings to the chat. Yahoo says South Africa with Ukraine. And yes, that is a common tactic. But that is the tactic, actually not the common tactic, that is the tactic, you know. The white people, the race family, the only race on the planet, white people, they're gonna stick together, whether they call themselves South Africans or Ukrainians, if they're classified as white and they want to practice racism in a similar manner, they're going to attempt to help each other, protect each other, and at the same time, you know, create buffer people, buffer victims who are going to defend them. A lot of times, defend them, you know, to the death, which is what we've been talking about when we say a lot of non-white people adapted this communism ideology to attempt to fight white supremacy. A lot of that has just led to, you know, non-white people murdering other non-white people, because white people are still able to convince us to use ideology against one another, but not logic. Yeah, and yeah, I was just thinking about the Vietnam conflict. Did the Vietnamese people, did they win that conflict? No. Well, yeah, they won the conflict, but did they win the war? No, the race war is still going on. But they won the conflict not by using communism, but by understanding that, hey, we're just gonna keep dying until until they leave. We're just gonna keep dying or attempting to kill them until the white people, the race soldiers, leave. That's what we're gonna do, and that's what they were doing. You know, they didn't stop attempting to kill the racists, or they didn't stop allowing the racists to kill them. And eventually, the racists gave in and stopped killing them in that manner. That's how they won that conflict. It wasn't through practicing any Karl Marxist nonsense, I suspect. But I may be in there.
Yeah, Ho Chi Minh, actually, the one who's who was opposing the French rule. Two things a lot of people don't know. He met he worked with Marcus Garvey in Harlem. They like worked together in a kitchen, a Harlem kitchen. but he learned while he was here in the United States, he learned about the Constitution, and what it was, and he wanted to have that same setup in Vietnam, with everybody basically, because they were pushing the whole idea of democracy and all that, which the whole idea, the concept of democracy is a constructive one. I think where the problem is just that the people who are always pushing it, the racist white supremacists who are always pushing it, don't really mean it, but he was trying to set that up. He wanted to have wanted Vietnam to have a constitution, and wanted the people in Vietnam to be able to call their own shots instead of having to depend on the wealthy white white farmers who controlled all the land there, and the other resources. 'Cause I think the main resource was rubber. I believe the Firestone Corporation is the main reason why the United States got involved, was because Firestone was making all the, they needed all that for tires or whatever. But they exhausted the resources. The United States kept putting so much money into that war. It was just too much. They had to back out. So yeah, I guess on that, and that level of where's the conflict of, that they won that conflict. And I want to go to Vietnam one day just to see what it's like, what the setup is like. But I suspect it's probably more like if you're watching the in some of those movies, those prison movies, and you see some of the prisoners who they got it going on. They got they got a nice little cell with pictures up, and they got a radio playing, and they're everything's nice in their side, in their part of the prison. I think that's the way Vietnam is set up in comparison to the system. I could be incorrect.
I agree, and I think that's a great way to put the differences between race camps. We are in a race camp of so-called California, and so area of the world known as Vietnam. Just a different race camp, maybe more pleasant sometimes, but at the end of the day, white people are in charge, and that should not be the case. So there's the Iran Contra debacle is also mentioned in chapter 4. And I just surmise that as just race soldiers attempting to sabotage and deceive one another in an effort to practice racism and white supremacy. I'm definitely not familiar with the incident. Dr. Senku, are you perchance having any information?
Oh yeah, from what I remember, well, first, hold on one second. First, I just want to say that I have to take it back to when I first heard of Iran, right? The first time I heard of Iran was when they took over the United States Embassy and held hostages. They held the people in the United States Embassy hostage, and the Black hostages they let go. They said that they believed that they used the term Black Americans. They said that Black Americans were already being oppressed and struggling in the United States, and they did not want to add to that struggle. So they let the Black hostages go. So that was what drew my attention to Iran. And when that situation happened, Jimmy Carter was the president. And so, he was already, you know, when they say public opinion, I'm thinking they're always talking about the opinion of white people, but he was already in you know, buried deep high in feces, because the hostage crisis happened while he was president, and they made an attempt to rescue the hostages or something, and some soldiers were killed in that attempt and stuff. So he just looked like crap. So they were happy that Reagan came in, because Reagan, who was also, I mean, someone who to me was very boisterous about being racist. Like there's, you know, I've read articles where he's, you know, said things like he didn't want black people in his neighborhood, he didn't want them to buy his house or stuff like that. And when he he, you know, he had a reputation. He was a staunch governor here in California. He was putting pressure on the Black Panther Party and you know, the so-called peace movement or whatever that was going on here. He was highly against that, boisterous against that. And as an actor, he was a cowboy. He was just like John Wayne type figure, you know, and fighting Indians and, you know, killing non-white people in the movies, and you know, just having this real so-called macho role, right? So then he becomes president, and while he's president, one of the things that he says is kind of just like what's going on in the Soldier of Fortune magazine. He's going to wipe out communism. You know, he's against the communists, and, you know, he's going to do whatever he can to bring an end to communism. So as a part of that end, he wanted to support the Contras. So you know, I heard you mention the Sandinistas earlier. So in Nicaragua, the non-white people were divided on, you know, split down the middle. You had the Contras, who were being supported by the United States, and the Sandinistas, who were being supported by the USSR. And he wanted to get, if I remember correctly, I may have some of this twisted, but he wanted money to finance the war, the Contras, to keep the Contras fighting. Okay. And this is where, now back then, when this Iran Contra thing came out, there was no mention of the CIA's involvement with the crack cocaine, which was another way they was funding the war. But the Iran Contra thing came out because they needed weapons. They needed money. They needed money for the Contras. So they sold weapons. If I remember correctly, they sold weapons to Iran to get money that they could use to finance the Contras. And it was a really big deal because everybody was looking at Iran as the enemy. You know, the public opinion, most of the white people here was looking. The first time I ever heard the word sand nigger, the first time I heard the term sand nigger was when it was being applied to the Iranians. It was supposed to be a secret thing where they're secretly selling weapons to the Iranians to get money to finance the Contras. And I don't remember how it fell out, how it leaked out or whatever, but this guy named Oliver North, this racist suspect named Oliver North, basically took the fall for the whole thing. They blamed it all on him. And, you know, Reagan, nothing really happened to Reagan, but it was supposed to be, at first, it was going to be like another Nixon type of thing. Because them selling weapons to Iran, they already had sanctions and all this kind of stuff against Iran. And them selling weapons to Iran was like, you know, it's supposed to be like a huge no-no. So, yeah, I think that's what the whole thing was about, if I remember correctly.
Thank you, sir. And I'm sure just a large number of very powerful racists, the likes of Tom Posey, Don Black, Glenn Miller, and a number of other races where we're involved, you know. Seeing if I have any more notes to share, anything I think that should be. And thanks to the audience for tuning in, and promise to be more concise next week when we cover chapter 5, The War Comes Home. Let me see.
Looking at all these covers of the Soldier of Fortune just keep making me have flashbacks, man. Like, I remember these covers, like every last one of them.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff, and we're gonna have these until we finish this book, because this is fascinating propaganda, and just I think what's in these books, just wow, you know.
Oh yeah, look, yep,
Wow.
I remember that one.
That's the Iranian president, right?
The
That was the one
Ayatollah,
that they tried to
Yeah.
overthrow.
yeah, he was the Ayatollah Khomeini. Yeah, no, they never tried to overthrow him. He overthrew. He so with the when the Iran hostage situation thing happened, so Iran used to have they had a monarchy, you know, where they had a king, but they called him the Shah. And the Shah got sick, and you know, he ruled Iran with like he was one of those dictator tyrant type people with the, you know, it seems like all of these dictators and tyrants, they have these special military police forces and stuff where they do a lot of torturing and stuff like that to people that you know, that speak out against them. And so when he left, he got cancer. He left the United States to you know, get some medical treatment, and that gave the Ayatollah Khomeini and his group the chance to move in and, you know, and take over while he was gone. So that's what they did. I'm suspecting, I know, I don't think any non-white people are doing any of these takeovers without having some kind of support from some racist white supremacists. A good movie to watch to see how they do this, it's called Burn, which is a great movie that shows how, you know, they do this stuff where they replace, you know, one person within the government with another person, and make it look like it's all, you know, done on the non-white person's to the non-white person's advantage or whatever. But yeah, he
Yeah,
was
like the
like
Taliban.
Like
the Taliban.
Yeah, exactly, like the Taliban, exactly, because the CIA helped the Taliban take over Afghanistan, you know. So but probably did the same thing with the Ayatollah Khomeini. But yeah, when they took over, he was public enemy number one around, you know. They had posters. Not only did they have those, the one that was in that book, they had large ones that, you know, and you'd see people at the range, at the gun range. They'd have them up at the gun range, and they're shooting them, you know.
Wow. Tacky and terroristic, if you ask me.
What was the name of that movie, Dr. Sinq?
Burn.
Burn, BURN. It's starring Marlon Brando.
I've seen that movie. That's a really good movie. It's the one where it's like he's in a Haiti type country, or like a Caribbean. Yeah, I've seen that movie. That is a really
exactly.
good movie. Yeah. You've
They
seen
take
clips
over,
of
they
it too,
take
I
over the
think.
island.
Yeah.
Yep, that's, you know, that movie is a perfect example, because what was he was like the British CIA. Marlon Brando worked for the British intelligence agency, and it was his job. Britain sent him into the island. The island was dominated by the Portuguese, and, you know, they sent him in to you know, rile up the, you know, he helped all the black people on the island learn how to fight. And then what happened when once they get if you remember the scene when the the black man that he got to be the leader, the black male he got to be the leader of everybody, came in and sat down at the table, and he was getting ready to start dishing out stuff, and the white people who had the money went to Marlon Brando, was like, yo, hold on, man, why is he in here? I don't know if you remember that scene.
Yes, he goes in with, I think, other people, and they get kicked out or something like that. And they think that they're about to take power, and they check them. Like, yeah, I remember that scene. That's a very great movie. And they're left like dumbfounded.
Exactly. And that's the way I think it happens, everywhere. If you look at the story of Idi Amin, the same thing happened in Uganda. The dictator that was there, he left to Britain. They asked him to go to Britain to see the Queen, and this was something that the British arranged. The British got the leader. They didn't like him anymore. He wasn't doing what they wanted him to do, so they told him to go visit the Queen. He got all excited, went to go visit the Queen, and while he was in Britain visiting the Queen, they helped Idi Amin take control over the country. So then Idi Amin took control, and while Idi Amin was in there, he started realizing that, he was looking at all the deception and everything that was going on. So he started making changes. They didn't like the changes that he made. So, they began to do what they had to do to get him out. But you can see these examples, all over the planet.
And they're smart about who they pick, because they pick someone that they know later on they can accuse them of something ideologically that doesn't align with like white European Western ideas. Like a lot of the times they'll use like feminism. So with Afghanistan, they'll be like, oh, girls, once the Taliban came in, girls were not able to read or do things like that. And it's like they're fine with that happening in Saudi Arabia because they get oil from them. But now that the Taliban is not doing exactly what they want, that they know to pick people that they can use, like they can use whatever their ideology is against them later on.
Yeah, and not even that, they can just make up a reason, just pick a reason to pick a fight with any person they want to make a target. But
that's right.
What you're saying.
Yeah, because a lot of the stuff that they said about Idi Amin was definitely not true. Heads in the refrigerator and eating people, and all that was straight up propaganda.
Reminds me of Dr. Wilson, the projection of cannibalism, because I remember seeing that movie too, The Last King of Scotland, and I think there's a scene at the end, or in one scene where the white guy discovers like all of these corpses that are like partially eaten and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's all propaganda. It's interesting.
Yeah, just grotesque racist propaganda. If anyone does a tiny bit of study, will easily discover racist man, racist woman, and racist child's history of eating people, not Black people.
And you'll find a lot of that information from you'll learn a lot of that information from these Soldier of Fortune magazines as well.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat for anyone to go ahead, download all these magazines and do some learning about the people we are attempting to deal with. Racist man, racist woman, racist child. They are just seeming to be masters of killing and producing instruments to kill, but must not be deterred. We must solve this problem, what else are we going to do besides solve the problem? Yeah, no need to waste any time. We will be back here next week, and hopefully I will be more concise and have some stuff to share from Soldier of Fortune, because this is mentioned a number of times, and we were able to tie it in a little bit with Michael Achilles, a highly celebrated white supremacist, and he's the he was a kill and kill some more guy, you know, because there's a lot of them. There's the I think Tom Posey, kill them all, let God sort them out. That's Tom Posey. And then we have Cocolis, who wants to test out his new shotgun on non-white people. So yeah, we're going to continue learning about these race soldiers next week, and continue to delve into how they just wield their incredible white power, and how non-white people will perish in large numbers because of it. That being said, Dr. Senku, Ms. Ash, would you like to share any closing comments or any notes that you may have forgotten to share?
No comment besides a very constructive meeting. Thank you.
No comment on my end. It was constructive.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Please comment, share, like this information if you found it to be of constructive value. CRWS signing out.
You are alive.
No. I exist.